In the past 3 years, doing demos has been so nerve-wracking because it used to be that when I walked out on stage at I/O to do a demo, I knew what the software was going to do. I feel pretty good. Most features I've demoed have been pretty solid, so I haven't been really nervous about it. AI, especially 2023, 2024, 2025, it would do random things, right? So you get a different response every time. So it's very hard to prepare a demo for this. But I think in the last 6 months, with 3.0 Flash, 3.1 Flash, it's really good now. So I don't think it's going to do something crazy. Of course, capacity is always a scary thing around I/O because everyone's hammering us because of all the new exciting features, right? But right when I was doing the demo, neither model was responding. Both our backend and the API key backend. And so I was switching on the fly, and that was and I got back to my desk and other people on the team were like, hey, is anyone having problems with 3 Flash? And I was like, oh, perfect timing.
And it just lasted just those days.
And that's the only time that's happened all spring was that one time I was on stage. But,
did you ask the people in the audience to please stop using the AI?
I didn't. Rewrite everything.
What could go wrong?
Always the right approach.
I heard this quote recently. You know how to say, 80% of code is now developed by AI and things like that. But 100% of code was written by compilers. Like, we didn't write assembly code, right?
What's the conversion factor for weeks to years in AI?
Infinite.
Do we have a theory?
Infinite.
For dogs, it's 1 to 7, right? AI, it's what, 1 to 70?
So if we produce a tool that deletes a developer's hard drive, it is our fault.
I've never found so many bugs.
Because you have this higher motivation level.
This reminds me to the Matrix movie when Neo says, I know Kung Fu. Yeah. This is what you do, to your agents. I know how to performance analyze an Android app.
Hello and welcome to Android Developers Backstage. I'm Tor Norby from the Android Tools and Libraries team.
I'm Chet Haas, not from those teams.
I'm Xavier Ducroy. I'm from the studio team.
I'm Esteban de la Canal from the Android Studio engineering team.
Right, I think we have a tools episode. I'm excited.
We never do a tools episode
except
for the last episode and then the one before that.
Yeah.
And then it's almost as if the only person from ADB left at Google is on the tools team.
I'm actually leading both the tools and libraries teams. So this is I'm representing both. But today we're going to talk about AI, and that is, I think, more on the tooling side currently. But so what we thought we'd do, we released a bunch of stuff. I don't know, it feels like a year ago, but I think it was just a few weeks ago, right, at I/O. But that's probably a few AI years, I think, right? What's the conversion factor for weeks to years in AI?
Infinite.
Do we have a theory?
Infinite.
For dogs, it's 1 to 7, right? AI, it's what, 1 to 70?
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. All so right. I/O was like 2 weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right.
And we released a lot. It's been a crazy year. Just thinking, I'm thinking back even 6 months. There's a lot we did. So maybe we'll take one thing at a time. So where should we begin? All right. Not everyone at the same time. Maybe we can start with something we released before I/O, but we haven't talked about here, and that is the Android CLI. So what is the Android CLI?
All right. I guess that's me. So about a month before I/O, we released Android CLI, which is this set of tools to start enabling Android development outside of the IDE. Aimed both at users, but obviously mainly at agents. Agents have proven to be very friendly with command line tools. So a month before I/O, we released Android CLI that allows you to start creating projects and start developing on Android.
Yeah. So, we had CLIs before. Gradle is a CLI, right? What was new about this?
The main gap that we tried to fill was getting started. So, of course, you could build with Gradle. There were some tools that allow you to download the SDK, but those tools were in the SDK. So you had to. The first step was always to install Studio, and it's a big process. It's a big roadblock, particularly for agents. If you ask your agent, any random agent, create my Android app, it'll be complicated. So we made all those steps easier. They were possible before, and we tried that with agents, and and this is where if anyone has seen the headline of the release of Android CLI, the 3X comes from, is agents were able to start a project, but it was very difficult for them to download all the bits they needed and set the environment up. So Android CLI makes all of that super straightforward.
So let's see if I understand this correctly. One of the things, my only exposure to agent coding so far is within the context of Gemini and Android Studio and using the agents as part of the IDE because I'm a faithful Android developer. But a lot of people obviously are tuning to different agents and platforms out there, and then they have it generate code, and then how do they make that into an Android app? Like, is this meant to address partially that problem of like, yeah, they had some other system produce the code, but then how do they actually build an Android app out of it, as opposed to like, and now what do I do with this code besides copy and paste it into Android Studio?
Yeah, so imagine you were using Cloud Code or any other command line agent without having Studio installed, and you ask your agent, can you create an Android app for me? That's where it would be like, okay, I need to install the SDK. It knows of a link to download the old SDK manager. And there are no concept of templates. It would have to make up what an Android app looks like. We have these features were all in Studio before, like templates and so on. So we moved them to CLI so that the agent can say, okay, what templates do I have? Oh, I have this app, and it can create an app the way we want it, so that developers don't start fiddling with some hallucination from the agent from
but it goes beyond, because I know that a lot of people are using Studio with these other agents. They'll have Studio, and in the terminal they've got Cloud Code, for example, right? And there are many other CLIs you've done to, for example, make it easier to figure out where's the APK, right? Or how do you launch the emulator and wait for it until it's ready to be talked to? Can you say more about like those workflows where I get that the SDK part is really useful if you don't want to like see Studio at all, but that other bit of empowering CLIs in conjunction with Studio.
Yes, so in fact, Android CLI can be used from the Studio agent as well. But once you have it set up, there's two things. First, we wanted the app that is created to be compatible with Android Studio, because you could say create an Android app and it could choose a technology that is not compatible or preferred by Studio. So then you can open Android Studio. And when you're working with Studio, we have commands for manipulating and creating emulators easier, for example, so that your agent could... small things like waiting for the emulator to be ready, like Tor mentioned, were complicated for the CLI. So you would see agents waiting, retrying, and CLI builds all of that in. So if you say Android emulator start, it will return once the emulator is ready. So you could pipe it or say and with something else that uses the emulator. So it makes the workflow from any agent, StudioBot, Cloud Code, or anything easier to use.
And even scripts. We had people, I think Unity, for example, for the longest time had Gradle plugins and so on, right? Trying to build things after you designed the game in Unity. And I think they were users of the old SDK manager script, right? And now they have probably a more maintained, sane set of scripts to use to deal with Android.
Yeah, and not just Unity, Flutter, and many other technologies that were using some bits and pieces from our scripts. They now have an official way to do all the management of their environment.
So you mentioned templates. Now CLI, Android CLI can use the templates that were previously embedded in Studio. Are you basically going through the process of taking all the stuff that's part of the IDE and pulling it out into this IDE agnostic layer, and then both avenues access that layer instead? Or are the templates still in Studio and the emulator logic and all that?
Great answer. We are in the process of unifying the two.
Yeah.
So templates have been moved to an SDK component so that they can be shared between Studio and the CLI. Still, the CLI only offers very minimal templates, but we are in the process of unifying the two so that they can be, when we ship in one, it shows up in the other.
So I'm curious what the various things are that the CLI would need access to that right now are just embedded in IDE. So you mentioned emulators as well. Are there other things that, like, since we've never been in this world before, obviously they're in Android Studio, but now how many things do you have to rethink in this IDE agnostic world?
Well, the line we want to draw is for Android CLI to be able to create projects, have an understanding of the build system that the project is using, manage your SDK, and manage your devices. That is it. That is the domain of CLI. It's basically the Androidness of building. So we are planning on adding more ways of acquiring devices, to setting them up, to make it easier for developers to get started. And then, of course, they go to Studio to do the advanced development or more development if that their agents cannot do.
Okay, so I was curious too about the iteration cycle. Okay, so we created the app, we used the template that you can now use from CLI, and we got the code from Claude Code or Gemini or wherever it came from, and now they want to, my experience so far is like there's a lot of iteration to get things to the state that you want them to be. Like how easy is it to then iterate with that as opposed to like the typical cycles that you have in the full IDE environment?
We have another set of commands for the agents iterating with you that I haven't mentioned. So we have interactions with the device. There are commands like many ADB commands allow you to click on screen or to take a screenshot, but we have added a layer on top of it. These are actually the most used commands of Android CLI today, where we would take a screenshot and annotate the screenshot so that the agent can see where the buttons are. We have a layer on top of the dump of the hierarchy, both for web views or compose or views. So we print the state of the UI for the agent to know. So things like require the agent to check if their change is working. So let's say the agent is working on a feature and launches the app. We're making it easier for the agents to go try, take screenshots, look at what's going on the screen, and then iterate itself with it. And those are the ones that are being used the most, because the setup commands are not toothbrush commands. The setup commands, you set your project once, but this set of commands are the ones that are iterating, developers are using to iterate with.
Yeah, so that's the CLI. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. And then one of the other big things we announced was Agents V2. So Zav, can you, Agents V2? V2 of what?
So when did we start the first chatbot? Was it like 3 years ago?
Yeah, it was 3 years ago.
So 3 years ago, we had that chat experience in Studio that was just like talking to was it Gemini at the time? I don't even know if I think it might have been.
I'm sure it was rebranded a couple of times
I think
since
it was
then
rebranded.
because that's what we do.
So you could just chat with it, and obviously that has limitation because that's in terms of like scope, right? Like you can't have parallel conversation with an agent or background conversation at least with an agent. So there was a lot of issues in this architecture. It evolved from a chatbot to an agent later, and
that was just a year ago. Again, the time here, like until last May, it was all chat. Like that is when we, with Gemini 2.5 Pro, we're finally able to have the capability, for us to build an agent on top of it. So that's something we like put in alpha in May 2025.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So in May, we converted from just a chatbot to an agent. We still had the limitation of not being able to do background task. Like you say, hey, go and implement this feature, and then you switch to another conversation to do something else while the agent is running in the background. You couldn't do that because the implementation was very tied to the UI. And so that was really a problem. And I discovered that when I tried to implement proper subagents, which was just like earlier this year or late last year, I started looking at doing subagent, and that turned out to be just impossible with the architecture. So we decided to rewrite everything.
Rewrite everything.
What could go
always the right approach.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We thought it was going to be a few weeks, and then it turned out to be more like several months. But finally, we were able to ship something in Canary at I/O. So it's just a new architecture. For the user, you don't see a lot of difference, beside the fact that you can run conversation in the background. So you can start an agent and then switch to a different conversation and ask something else, and you have basically independent conversation.
Also, there's parallel conversations.
Right.
There's parallel tool calls.
Yes.
There are sub-agents.
Right. So since we rewrote the whole architecture, we were able to be like more modern in terms of what the feature set needed to be. So we didn't have parallel tool calls. So now when the agent replies to you, it can ask for multiple tool calls, and we will execute them in parallel. And then we have sub-agent, which was the original intent, where the agent can make a call to a sub-agent, and then the sub-agent runs independently, and then just returns a response, and the whole context of everything that happened in the sub-agent is hidden from the calling agent. So that's a way to manage context, right? So that the main agent doesn't have a lot of intermediate step it doesn't care about.
Can you help me understand sub-agents? Is this something an agent will decide that something would be more efficient if it can have a minion do that? Or is this something that I, as the developer, would request? Here are the things that I want you to parallelize and do in the background.
So in Studio right now, we do have we give the ability to the agent to start a sub-agent when it decides that it's a good idea. So we have some instruction for it, telling it to when it can be useful. And if it decides that there's a bunch of things that it wants to do, but it doesn't really care about the intermediate step. It just cares about the response. Then it can spawn off a sub-agent. And then that sub-agent will run, it's completely independent in terms of context. It has its own prompt, its own tools, and it just calls, and it has the whole history. And then at the end of that, it just returns the response, and all of that history just is gone away and hidden from the main agent. But for now, ultimately, only up to the agent.
I had a really good experience with this just, I think, a week ago. I had accumulated a bunch of improvements locally, so I had about 20 CLs. And so I wanted the agent to review all these, like, independently. And so I said, hey, can you review all of these CLs independently and write, like, a report? And it actually decided then to start a because I'd written how I wanted it to review, what to focus on. And it decided to run each review in a sub-agent. But sub-agents are also parallel. So in parallel, it spawned off 20 concurrent reviews. So it was burning through a lot of tokens, although the nice thing about sub-agents is that they are not, you're not accumulating all 20 reviews in the same one. But that whole parallelism of subtasks is pretty exciting too.
So it's burning through a lot of tokens, but wouldn't it burn through those anyway, even if you were in the old world?
It was more of a comment of like, this is...
You can burn through them really quickly.
Yeah, you can.
Well, it's just that, like, if you have everything into the same log, because you send everything back to the agent every time you ask for a new thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's some caching, so the cache token costs less, and they're more efficient.
Okay.
But if you're the history that you keep sending, right? If it's all in parallel, you send fewer, and then when you're done with them, then it's only the response that is sent back to the main agent that is part of that agent. It's called a trajectory, right? And that trajectory keep being sent to the agent on every turn, but it's smaller than if everything had been done in the main agent.
The sub-agents basically lets it not worry about the details, so the main conversation isn't going to see all the intermediate file reads and writes and stuff that happened as part of the subtask.
So maybe I'm asking the wrong questions, but can you help me understand, like, what is the visibility of token usage to the developer? Because, like, my only experience so far is occasionally it'll come back and go, yeah, I don't want to do that right now. Like, and because maybe it hit, whatever limit I'm at with whatever account I have. Or maybe it was a bug.
If it tells you that, I think it's just capacity issue on the back end.
And that was probably the case there. But I do wonder, like, if you're burning through, because I've heard these stories of people where, like, something got in a loop in the background and they burned through their monthly thing in a couple of hours. How do you know that? Is there a visual indicator or textual indicator somewhere of, like, here's what's going on?
In the settings, we have where you manage your model. If you're signed in with, like, a Google One subscription, like called AI Pro, AI Ultra, all of those, right?
Yeah.
We have a UI now that shows you how much of your quota you've used for each of the models, because I think the Flash and the Pro model have different quotas. So if you have that subscription, you will see what it is. And then for each trajectory, at the bottom right, there's, like, the current token count, which include, like, if there's compression, that will be reduced, but it shows you basically that amount of token. But
this is one of the reasons why, I know there's some people who will, like, fire off agent jobs and not look at them and just kind of wait for it to be done. I like to look, to start things, because every now and then I see that it's going down a path that I can tell is a waste of time. Like, and sometimes it's not the model's fault. I've had cases where I pasted in something I wanted to do, not realizing I'm on the wrong branch. In the background, I had switched to something else, and then I'm asking it to continue something, and that file isn't there. And it's doing all this work trying to find this thing that I'm implicitly telling it should be there, but it's not there. It's wrong, right? And so for me to keep an eye sometimes and go like, no, just, to give it a steering message, or to just abort and say, oh, sorry, let me switch branches.
Do we need to display the branch in that UI so that you know where you're wrong?
But there are the cases like that, right, where you paste into the wrong conversation or whatever, right? Something. So if you care about tokens, and I'm kind of lucky that I have a lot of tokens, through my employer. But if you care about that, then actually sometimes with this parallel UI, being able to see them as they're running, and sometimes tell, like, oh, I don't know about this direction. Let me steer. It's pretty useful.
I wonder if there's something different that we can do with, like, the conversational aspect of the agents, where, like, right now there is this tendency for agents to be obsequious in the response, like, hey, that's a great idea. Thank you for pointing that out. Let me try that again. But instead, maybe it should say, hey, dummy.
The agent's been telling me that, like, Is it not just me? Is it telling
No,
is it telling you that you're good
different.
too?
You really are special. Yeah. But for everyone else, no, it's
I
just
was
words.
special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for
No,
when
I
you're
think
doing it.
Gemini especially really is very, very impressed by some of the insights. You're absolutely right. Does that phrase sound familiar?
Yep.
And I have a mention in my agents.md to tone it down, and it's just
Really?
not enough. It just keeps telling me I'm amazing, and that's like, no, that's not. No.
Maybe you are amazing.
I have this weird experience where like I will ask it to do a bunch of stuff like, it's doing an image here. I do a little bit of coding thing there. I was doing some website creation stuff there. And like my interactions are all through Gemini, and it's pooling the information. I don't even know how, because I didn't think I was in the same chat thing. And occasionally a response will come back like, like iterating on a website thing, and it'll say, and in fact, since you're a runner, I'm like, whoa. I didn't say anything about running in this chat. Why are you bringing this up? So like you never quite know like what is the information that it is actually retaining or getting through like, the bundled prompts that are going back and
Well, I know
forth.
that at some point when I was using Gemini, I had the option to link my workspace to it, and I did it. And so it can actually go look at my docs and so on. And so I'm suspecting you must have said yes to that. That won't happen in the studio agent.
Yeah.
Like that is not linked. But I do suspect when you use the online Gemini, it's useful.
It's taking all the information it ever knew about you. So I wanted to ask about sub-agents again, or the ability to parallelize stuff. So I heard, I had friends that had been working on this stuff, not just in this room, for the last several months, and they'll mention, I was incredibly productive. I did this thing, and I was spawning like 20 agents to go off and do this thing. I was like, wow, what am I missing that I don't even know how to do that? And it makes me feel better that Studio wouldn't let me do that, because then it wasn't my fault. But now that you can actually parallelize these things and use sub-agents or multiple agents in parallel, I guess what is the best practice for people to do this? Like how can they integrate this into their workflow in Studio or Android CLI? What are the types of tasks that really lend themselves to this approach, and then how do people do this so that they can just be more productive? Because I didn't need to wait for that thing to come back to make the next step, which could have been happening in the background.
There are two parts of parallelization. That one is like Sav was saying, we have sub-agents, but there is another trend of having remote agents that is surfacing, where you can parallelize big tasks you have a fleet of agents running on the cloud.
Yep.
And the reason I'm mentioning this is because this is one of the goals of Android CLI, that in low memory or constrained environments, let's say you have a sub-agent that is going through all your bugs and trying to reproduce, fix them, and send you changes. So you could parallelize that in as many agents as you want, but you will probably have that in the cloud where you get your code, go look at the bug using some sort of MCP or situation to get all your bugs, try to fix a bug, try to reproduce the bug on your app running an emulator, and sending you the CL with the fix. So there is that level of parallelization that is starting to show up with remote agents, and I think Jules was the Google technology that allowed that, and there are many others that are allowing in the cloud agents. And of course, there is the local sub-agent that has, there are different ramifications for that, because, Tor, you were talking about your 20 local CLs. If one of your sub-agents decides to roll back in your Git repo, unless you're using Git subtrees or any other technology to help you manage destructive operations on your local machine, that starts getting more complicated. So there's two types of parallelization. And I guess sub-agents is more on the local one. Right,
Sub-agents are used for reviews, and typically for reviews, because I'm doing more of the thing where like I want 3 or 4 things to happen at the same time. So I may have sort of a main task that it's doing in my work. You can use Git work trees, but I don't tend to do that. But so there's one task that's mainly focused, and then I'll have other agents that are like doing research for the next thing. So they're doing the analysis, and I'll say don't make changes. And they're kind of just doing all the analysis, reading files, thinking, and so on, and so that they are like ready. By the time this thing is done, I'll have it commit that change, and then I'll switch to this other thing and say, okay, now you get the main driver's seat. I have successfully had it also both make changes to the same repository, and Gemini seems to be able to understand that if it is making changes and it's asked to commit it, it doesn't get confused about the fact that there's other edits too and starts like unrolling those. It seems pretty good. The only danger is if they're changing the same files. And so Studio's agent has some provisions for this, right? Where we keep checksums. And so if the agent tries to write a file that has changed since it last read it, it'll be told like, you don't have a correct view of this, please read again. It seems in practice, like if you're explicit about the tasks you're doing, if you're working on an app and you have multiple things you're doing, like I want to migrate to Nav3 and I want to do this shared element transition and I want you to update my README, you can manage all of those sort of in parallel and just kind of switch between them. This whole thing of like, I want you to attack 40 bugs from my database, that probably is definitely more of a fork off remote jobs and hope you don't run out of tokens.
Yeah, I will say that in Studio right now, we don't really have the ability to like spawn dozens of agents, right? This is like, we just got sub-agent, right? We want that to go stable first.
So I still have an excuse for not doing this.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean,
this
still
have
is
the ability
step,
to launch as many jobs as you want.
Yeah.
Again.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can start as many background conversations. You just have to go and manage them one by one. As Thor said, you kind of have to go and figure out, so that they don't interact with each other too much.
Are these separate tabs?
I just want
in
a
the
PSA.
UI?
There's a keyboard shortcut for navigating. So like you don't go and click. That's so there's keyboard shortcut for cycling through the active ones, for up and down in the history, and like that's really useful to know as a user when you're doing many things. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, are they separate tabs in the agent UI?
So in the tool window, you have a drop down where you can switch between them or use a shortcut.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And in Canary, there's also, you can open them in the editor. So they're actual editor files you can jump.
Okay. And is it still the recommendation for all of this agent stuff, since it's obviously iterating really quickly, try Canary? Like I remember
Canary's
like last
where you
summer
wanna
when I came back, you were like, "Oh, you're using the chatbot." No. We've moved on. Get the Canary.
Well, we have done a couple things. And the first one is we've switched to monthly releases, and that makes a big difference where, like you're not having to wait a whole quarter for something. So, because in the old model, you'd be looking at stuff we did 4 months ago or 5 months ago, and in AI years, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a little bit closer now. And I think we're about to put all the stuff we did at I/O. It's going to go into stable, right, in a few weeks.
Yeah, so we should have an RC early next week.
Okay.
And that will be the version that will go stable a couple of weeks later. And that will be the first version that have the instable that has this, V2 version of our.
Okay.
But it doesn't have everything. So another thing we launched at I/O, which I'm really excited about, is the change review tool. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Esteban?
Yeah, one of the common flows is to ask the agent to make a change, and then you're in the reverse seat of trying to understand what it did, because at the end of the day, we are responsible for the code we produce. So we started designing a new tool in Android Studio to help you review your own changes before you send them out, which is also, at the same time, we're getting developers sending us bigger changes because they're producing them with AI. So you can also use this tool to review other people's changes. But I'm finding the use mostly in reviewing my own changes when I'm using AI to generate code. And the idea is this tool is looking at your change and organizing it differently that you would go in a standard code review, that it's by file, and then you enter by file. We have the AI analyzing the code first, explaining what it's doing, organizing the code chunks by topic. So you can say, okay, let's say you have a change that makes a backend change and a frontend change. It will organize, even if the changes, if the diffs chunks are in the same file, it will present to you, okay, this is the part that talks about that thing. And then you can review individual chunks of code. This is the part that talks about the other thing. And each chunk with its own explanation. So it's explaining itself to you. And then you can sign off on changes and say, I want to revise this or change that. So it's basically, we're building tools to help developers handle large amount of code changes, which is
we built it because we need it.
Exactly.
It's one of those things where we are reviewing more and more code, and we wanted something better than sitting in the browser and looking file by file.
Yep.
And so I think there's two modes of this tool. There's the one where you are just having the AI did something. I don't want to read the diffs of what the AI did until the AI is proud of their own work. And typically they're not, right? So like they did something, and then I will start a new conversation to not bias it by by its own decisions, right? And say, hey, look at this other work someone else did. Please review this. And it'll often go like, oh, well, I spotted this problem, I spotted that problem, and it's missing this test. And so the AI can do that, and this review tool will help you with that. Because one thing I noticed when I was doing like the manual review is it would suggest a handful of things. And I might disagree with some of the things it suggested. For example, because we have this agent V2, we have both the old agent and the new agent. And often there's duplication because we're bringing functionality over. And the AI loves to say, oh, well, there's duplication. Let's create a shared utility. And I was like, no, we're going to delete V1. I want the duplication's intentional. So one of the things that the review tool lets me do is just check the things I wanted to fix. Because before I'd have to write, like, yeah, fix number one, I'd have to try to refer to the list of the things to fix, right? And sometimes it even has the same numbers. It'll say bugs, 1, 2, 3, idiomatic Kotlin usage, 1, 2, 3, and I have to like qualify it. And so just the ability to have it, that loop of quickly getting feedback, saying yes, yes, no, no, yes, fix, that cycle without looking at any diffs is useful.
Yeah.
And then there's that second half.
Yes, absolutely. And also for coworkers, CLs, I would cherry pick them into my workspace and ask. We have several entry points for this tool, so you can go to your Git history and say review this change or review the change that the agent just did. So it's super useful to. I think we're going to have to handle more and more volume and higher volume of code. So we are investing in ways of looking at it.
Yeah, and if you try this in Canary today, we have so many things in the works for this tool. So like this is not the end state, I mean, using it, you'll already have 10 feature ideas yourself. So like this is something I'm extremely excited about for selfish reasons. So, I review a lot of code.
So related to that, like it's interesting and useful that like you are not just building things that you hope your developers will use, but you are using tools that you actually need internally. To what extent are you using the tools that you're building for like code review versus no, we have a different version of that because we're building on a different thing?
I think that with AI, we have reached a whole new level of using our own stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Like we use Compose, to build it. It used to be that, Android views was this thing that users use. We write stuff in Swing. Now we're using Compose. We're using our own agent. There's very few things. Maybe when it comes to like emulator control, like there's some areas where we start getting into this is for users, but so much of what we build.
Yes, in fact, in the last year, or in AI years, in the last 70 years, or whatever it is, we switched our development environment to be Android Studio itself. So we develop with Android Studio so we can start flight testing all these things. We didn't do this in the past.
Yeah.
But to be clear, before it was IntelliJ.
Yes, correct. So things are moving so quickly that, we want to use our own tools so we can drive test it before we send them to our developers. That was part of the shift to releasing once a month as well.
Because there were things where we used IntelliJ and then we heard some user reports that some things were slow that we didn't see. And it turns out that there were some things we had in Studio that slowed down the editor that we didn't see because we weren't actually using it. So to actually use our own things, I think we're more responsible for freezes and hangs and all these things, right?
Yes, yeah. In fact, again, AI moving so quickly that we released next edit prediction ages ago, that is November. And it was critical for us to use it ourselves. Depending on which model you have, we had access to other models at Google, but if we don't use the tools, we just don't have the physical time to release them in the time that is needed today.
Yeah, it's the same thing for Agent V2, right? I moved to it in a very early version where I was basically dogfooding what I was writing. Like 2 hours later, I could just restart Studio, rebuild it, and just test it and take it for a spin, like for the next several hours, and make sure that what I did was actually useful. And then we moved the whole team to it. But like the few of us that started that effort, we moved to it quicker than the other ones. And we dogfooded it as we are building it. And we still do today, right?
And so there's this continuous stream of not just bug reports. I would say it's even more common that we have suggestions for how to make things better. Because as a user, you see these things. And, when you're using, I'm guilty of this too. Like I would use IntelliJ and I loved it. And I wasn't always filing bugs because it's kind of a high bar to go to someone else's issue tracker. You don't know if they're going to prioritize it, right? But when you're reporting it to your coworkers, your own thing, there is more of an expectation that people will file these things, and they do, and we keep iterating.
I've never filed so many bugs.
Right? Because you have this higher motivation level, right? And maybe that's a very selfish thing, right? But you're like, this thing I'm using, I want this to be fixed.
Well, it's also that, as you said earlier, right? Like, all the things that are very Android specific, if we don't use them day to day, then, I don't have the opportunity to encounter problems. While using, Studio all day long, there's so many things that become annoying. It's like, I hate this thing. I need it to be fixed, so I will file a bug for it, right?
Yeah, I used to file a lot of bugs, around conferences because I would put together a demo and I would try to build things and I would discover things. But I wasn't encountering it in my daytime job, and now I do.
So should we expect a bug filing agent soon?
There's already like a GitHub MCP server, right? So if you connect your agent with a GitHub MCP, for example, you can ask your agent to look at your list of bugs, and then point it to be like, go fix bug 42, and it will go and pull it up and fix it. Or if it tells you like, well, this thing is, you should fix it, you could say, file a bug for it so I can get to it later, and it will do it.
Okay.
And going, sounds like I'm trying to sell Android CLI, but one of the usages of this is having an agent like that going through your app, and Android CLI understands journeys, so you can point Android CLI to a critical user journey, or you could do it in MD, say, okay, go through my app, do this, and then you give the agent the instruction to, if something goes wrong, file a bug, and the agent will go through your app, and if detects something incorrect, it will file a bug.
I have an app in the Play Store, and in the past, and I changed to UI completely with an agent, the other day, and then I had to update the screenshots, and I was like, this is a pain. And I realized, like, no, I have a README, so I just told the agent to go and start emulator for both phone and foldable and tablet, and to go to the critical sort of user features and make sure that there's something interesting to see. And it did it. It has a folder of screenshots, and it just went and it was able to navigate through the app, but also, crucially, not make me have to go and boot all the right images to get the different form factors that is expected for the Play Store. So the ability for it to navigate the UI is really important. Can you talk more about Journeys? What's going on with Journeys these days?
Journeys evolved slower than the AI world. So by the time we had a version ready for something we wanted to release with Journeys, the AI universe had shifted into a new world. So
just to be clear, we built this before 2.5 Pro, right? So we really needed a dedicated model that knew how to click on screens and so on. And so it was not the give the agent tools to do what it wants.
Yes, exactly.
So sorry, rewind. What was the original Journeys
So Journeys
thing?
is this concept that allows you to test the critical user journey through your app. So you would specify, let's say you have a hotel booking app, and you would say in English, I want you to search a hotel in the city and then find the cheapest one and then book it. And then you would run in your app and test that flow works.
Mm-hmm.
The models were not that good a year ago. So there was a lot of architecture and scaffolding around it to make it work. But as soon as we were ready, the models were way better, that the scaffolding was not needed anymore. And we got to a point today where the journey can be described directly in English. And with the right set of tools, the agent can do it without any scaffolding.
Right.
So everything that I just described in my app, I could write it into an MD and say, hey, test that you can book something.
MD.
And a markdown file.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, before it was still in English, as Thor said, but it was like an XML file with very specific steps. Right?
Yeah.
First
we picked XML again back when this is the Android
Yeah.
native file format and so on.
But the point is that it was structured with you would say, I'm going to have 10 steps and this is exactly what I want you to do. And there were some verification steps and stuff like that. Now you can just basically write a paragraph and it will just deal with it. And you don't have to be super precise in how you structure it.
So did Journeys go from here's this massive feature that we worked on to it's just something that you interact with the agent
Well,
on?
we distilled what the agent needs to use to be able to interact with your app. And those are the commands, the interact commands in Android CLI, that it can take a screenshot or it can find an element in the UI. And then that's all the agent needs to perform these operations.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a bit of instruction, right? There's a skill associated with Android CLI so that it knows how to use all those things.
Yeah.
But that's really all it needs. Yeah.
So you just kept the top layer of what Journeys used to be.
Well, we had, templates in Studio. We had integration with Gradle and test suites. There was a whole integration with the test run UI where you got the before and after images and all of that, right? So,
well, that was ongoing. We never really shipped it.
Yes. Well, some people only live in the canary world, right, Chet?
Yes.
So they had it. But where did we end up now? What is the in IDE situation for Journeys? What is the CI situation for Journeys?
So we're converging the two, but we still have the format of what a journey file is. Our agent understands that, and we have the ability to translate the XMLs into a more free format that the agent can understand. But we are shifting to converging that into we are shipping the same tools that we have in Android CLI and Android Studio, so that StudioBot, our own agent, can invoke this, and then you basically describe the agent. I have this sequence of steps. Please test it, and it will do what it wants to do to test it.
And so for command line releases or on CLI, you use something like anti-gravity CLI plus the skills in Android CLI. That's how you run the journey off outside the IDE.
Yeah, or you could ask StudioBot to do the same thing.
Yeah. Have you tried journeys with a local model like Gemma 4?
We have tried many things with local models, and the main thing is speed at the moment. They can accomplish a lot of the tasks. They take longer, not just because they run locally, of course, but they take longer because they might not make the best decisions right away until they figure out, I just need to click this button. And then execution takes longer.
So there's higher variability if the model isn't quite as sharp.
Yeah, or it could get stuck in a corner. But it's free on the other hand.
Yeah.
So it depends how token cost evolves in the next year. Whether this will become, and also the quality of the offline models. This can be really good for CI.
Well, the challenge is that on CI you're not going to have a very good GPU, right? Probably because you're running in some VM somewhere, and I don't know how much you'll be able to get really good performance, right? It's going to be even worse than your local.
Yeah, I mean there's CI, and then there's like many teams will have like a manual sign off before release, right? So that could also even be on your desktop. You press a button and you come back the next morning and you see how did it do.
But there was one thing we tried to do with journeys that we are moving away from. Developers ask for two distinct things. Is they want AI to look at their app, because there's a lot of QA that could be sped up by having AI looking at the app. And there is also the deterministic text execution, which journeys attempted to do at some point, but we're moving away from that, where the journeys are not deterministic. So as soon as you put AI on your test, this is like having a human in the loop. It will not be reproducible. Like, I have a pre-submit failure with an AI. That's not meant for this. This is meant for try to book. It shows you what it did, and your app crashed, for example. And then you get a bug file for that. But it's not for CIs in terms of testing deterministic tests.
Are we? I think at some point we discussed, and I think there's some solutions out there. Are we looking at generating deterministic testing from Journey?
Yes. We're looking at that and looking at other solutions that are open source to do this. Some of the solutions work. This is very common in games where you play through and you record what you do, so you can deterministically do that again. So we could take that approach where the agent tries to do something, and if it succeeds, it could record it and keep repeating it. So
like keystrokes are recorded along the way.
But this is also where AI is moving so fast. So like a year ago, like that was a very, very promising direction of, you can drive the UI in the same way. Now the AI has gotten so good that just the other day, I had it actually write espresso tests.
Yeah.
And it did a good job with that. Like it took a little while, and it ran the tests and debugged itself and got the tests working. So I have a few espresso tests for like the critical baseline thing, and then the journeys can cover way more things.
Yeah. In fact, you could ask it, you have this journey. We don't need to record it. Do the journey and then write the code that will do it again. Yeah.
And like one of the nice abstractions about Journey is that sometimes, like I remember demoing the Pocket Casts podcasting app about a year ago when Journeys first came out, right? And for some apps, there's a bunch of setup steps. You launch the app, you're a first-time user. You have to go through the onboarding. You don't want every single test to have to repeat that, right? So that is where you want that little abstraction of like, being able to reference, either referencing a backup restore file that it can like use to put the app into the right state, or common procedures and so on, right? There, just having an MD file and an agent capable of executing it isn't all you want for something that is going to be recording your critical user journeys.
All right, so that was 3 major features. Anything we're missing so far? Like that was announced at I.O. or just current
one thing
state?
we launched on I.O. with Android CLI is the ability to communicate with Android Studio. So we have a studio command in Android CLI, which I love the confusion that it generates, but you can, in the command line, write Android space studio space, and you will be talking to your instance of Studio. This is the equivalent of an MCP server. I could go on and on about why I particularly prefer command line versus MCP servers, but it's effectively the same thing, where you can, let's say you're running Studio. From your command line, you could say Android Studio, find references. You give a symbol, and it will talk to the running version of Studio and list in the command line this. So if you wanted to use a separate agent or something, you could access some of the features in Studio. We have the render preview functionality. We have a bunch of tools that are available to the Studio agent, but now are accessible outside. So that's another thing we launched.
And something like usage finding is, it's incredibly important for time and token usage. We've seen. We have a bunch of stats. We've been improving the we call it the code base awareness tools, right? The search tools we have in the agent, but it's the same principle for the ones exposed by the CLI. But, when something like Kotlin, if you have a large code base, this doesn't happen in a small project, but in a big project, it makes a huge difference if you can just find the references. Because a grep might not find all the references, because we know that in Kotlin, there's a difference between the symbol and this symbol-y. I'm not sure how to call the things being referenced, right? And then, of course, sometimes, just because you have two function calls to a function doesn't mean they're both calling the same one, right? It actually depends on the class path and language semantics. Like, is this actually hitting that method, right? So grep is an inexact science. And so giving agents access to this actually makes a big difference.
So help me understand the use case where somebody wants to use CLI, but they're also using Android Studio. Like, I understood Android CLI being on its own because I just want to deal with command line stuff, and I'm setting up the app and, grabbing my code from wherever it's coming from, agents in the cloud or whatever. So what are they, where are they using both heads of this monster?
This depends on the user. If they have a flow they're already used to that they have on the command line, or if they're using a different agent that is only command line, they're using Intergravity CLI because they like it, or something like that.
One thing we hear a lot now is that, even though we support you to use any model you want in Studio, if you have a Claude subscription, that only works with Claude Code. And so if you want to use Claude Code as an Android developer, you can't use Gemini in Android Studio. You're going to get the Gemini model, not the Claude model. So if you have a particular agent you want to use because your company picked it or because you have a subscription, that would be one use case.
Yes.
So Android CLI is talking to Claude Code, and you're still using the IDE for launching the emulator, step debugging, whatever it is. Is that right?
Well, it's the other way around, right?
Claude Code is
talking to
invoking Android
CLI,
CLI. Yes.
and CLI is using Studio to give better answers to the agents.
Sure. I think I have to play with this to really understand it. I should grab the canary or the RC.
So I think CLI, is this bit of a departure in the sense that we are supporting other tools, and we went even further. And so maybe we can talk about some of the other things, some of the other tools that we launched support for. I'm thinking of things like AI Studio and Intergravity.
At I/O, we also launched the integration with the Intergravity 2.0, where if you download Intergravity 2.0, it's basically just standalone agent, where at startup it would offer many. I think they call it Build by Google, where you can choose, if you want to do a Firebase project, and Android is there, so you can select Android, and then in their agent, the Android skills will be installed by default, and that means Android CLI. So Intergravity, which is standalone hub, it's basically a conversation with an agent.
Yeah.
It will know what Android CLI is, and if you say create an Android project, it can call us.
Okay.
And you can create a project that then you can open in Android Studio. And we did the same with AI Studio. In AI Studio, this is a web page, it's a Google site where you can vibe code your apps. Under the hood is also using Android CLI, so that all the flow can go. You can go from AI Studio, create your, let's say you want to create a to-do list app or something for yourself. Then they have a flow to export to Intergravity. And then, because it's created with the same templates and the same technologies we use, you can evolve or migrate your way into Android Studio.
So it's kind of like this funnel of, like, if you are just vibe coding and you don't care, AI Studio. If you're a developer, Intergravity is one that sort of supports all kinds of tech. And if you are really targeting Android, then Android Studio is sort of the pro tool that you want to use. But you can kind of migrate from one to the next.
Yeah, they bottom out in Android CLI when they need to. I wondered about that because I got Anti-Gravity, I think last week I was playing around with website creation stuff, and for some reason I ended up there and it said I can do Android. I'm like, how does that work? Now I know.
That's us.
Yeah, that's why we wanted the same core everywhere, so the apps are compatible, the versions, the libraries, everything. Yeah.
So does that mean if I'm using AI Studio on the web, like, is it ending up installing local stuff if I tell it to do an Android thing? So
it's all in the cloud.
It's on the back end.
And that is a cool thing, that it actually launches an emulator in the browser. So if this is a very, very easy on-ramp, nothing to install. It just works in your browser.
Yeah.
And they'll show you the code, but you can't edit the code. So this is really more of you're living in the sort of the prompt world.
Yeah.
If you can take that to Intergravity by clicking a button, or download the source code and go directly to Studio. But there's a button to actually launch this into a local install of Anti-Gravity where it downloads it.
Okay, so I guess that's the barrier between cloud and local. It's like you're either in AI Studio or you're in Anti-Gravity, and then Anti-Gravity is going to use Android CLI locally, which then talks to Android. It's basically all the tools.
Yeah.
All the tools, all the time, and they're all using agents.
We supply things for everybody.
Okay.
But, that is our goal, right? Like, we really want Android to shine.
Yeah, I guess that was the mystery to me that I guess all of the stuff is meant to solve. It's like, well, what if people are using other tools? How do we make sure that the Android app experience is what we would want it to be? And I guess this makes sure that otherwise they're ending up with a bunch of generic code. Now, what do they do with it?
Yeah, let's say if we didn't do this and you put yourself into a corner where you need Android Studio to dive into a problem on your app, but it took a different path that Android Studio cannot open, then as a developer, you would be stuck in whatever corner randomly you got put into.
There are some other, I think, interesting things, in the in IDE agent V2. We had some of this in V1, but I still think it's, I think there's a richer and better implementation in V2. It's one of those things when you rewrite something, you get the chance to do it properly, right? And one of them is the file critic, right? So whenever the agent runs in Studio, before it writes any file, it'll run lint on it. Not just lint, like all of IntelliDis inspection. So this is about 2,800 things that it checks for. And it'll keep track through the whole trajectory of which things you introduced. And it'll hold the AI responsible for it, right? So if the AI writes a file and introduces, let's say, we'll pick something innocent like an unused variable. It'll keep, it'll tell the AI, this is a thing you introduced. And so you can, and we show this in the UI now, so you can kind of see what it's doing. And you can often see that it corrects itself. And so you have very immediate feedback. Unused variable is not a big deal, right? You'll probably catch it anyway. But often there are specific Android steers, like, hey, this thing will crash because your minutes decay is 24, but this API you called requires 28. And so it'll very rapidly coalesce to a solution as opposed to discovering later. Sometimes it might never discover it because it might not have tried running that particular path or try on a device old enough or whatever. So the file critic, I think, is something interesting.
So it's also, it's more than just lint or stuff like runtime issues, right? Like I've seen the agent, call an API that does not exist or pass the wrong parameter. And what happens is that then it tries to build. So it runs Gradle to build, and Gradle will take a while. And then, you're also, it's not just about token optimization, right? It's also about your time optimization. If it keeps having to do an edit, build to see if it works, tweak the code, build to see if it works. And because it runs all the inspection, it also runs the basic, symbol resolution. So it will tell the agent, this thing does not exist.
Yeah.
And then it will try to go.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a lot faster to react purely from a time point of view, not just a token efficiency.
I like the other example because I think every agent eventually discovers that the code doesn't compile, where it's not like many other agents unless they call the CLI command to analyze. But that's going to be way more like optional, like they may or may not do it, right? But basically, like there's subtle things that we point out that still builds and still runs, but maybe there's a security violation, right? And so
But we've heard recently from users that build performance, is even more of a problem with agents because agents have to keep building again and again. And so I think that's also an important point. But you're right that there's something that it will discover that
I think even for
normal agents won't.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we're hearing more and more is that developers care not just about, like they also care about time and cost, and that's why I think that the CLI announcement about like, hey, we see that you're saving all these tokens because it doesn't have to try to rediscover and stab around in the darkness. And it's the same thing with the agent search tools. When it doesn't have to keep calling shell commands to try to list files and folders and so on, it makes a big difference. You can get straight to the answer.
So am I correct in assuming that the entire AI push of the Studio team over the last couple of years is all about running your lint checks more often?
Guilty.
And Gradle less often.
No, yeah. No, I mean, I feel like we talked about this already, but like and I think, we're all engineers who've been around a long time, and we've seen how engineering is changing. I know that not everyone believes this, but I believe it.
It's definitely shifting and very rapidly.
Yeah.
Like two examples that I see is one, we used to take feature requests from developers, but now if I run an agent and I tell it do this with Android CLI because I'm developing a feature, and the agent decides to use the CLI in a way that I didn't design it, but it says I'm going to call this command with these arguments, and it fails because I don't support that, I take feature requests from agents now because I want the agent to be able to do its job faster.
Mm-hmm.
So because developers are interacting with it, so it's shifting how we develop tools, it's shifting how we code. I heard this quote recently that you know how to say, 80% of code is now developed by AI and things like that, but 100% of code was written by compilers. Like, we didn't write assembly code, right? So that abstraction layer is shifting one level up, where we are developing apps in a different language that is not necessarily code, and all the tools are shifting towards that as well. So it's a huge shift.
Maybe we can go around the table. What percentage of characters submitted in your latest commits did you hand type? I can go first. It's less than 1%. I normally now ask the agent to write the code, but I go many iterations of like, no, not like that, or try this other way, right? But I'm not really writing skeletons. I'm absolutely not using code completion. So even though we built next data prediction, I'm not really using it anymore because I'm finding so much that I'm working at a slightly higher level, but I'm still very detailed in the code. But anyway, how about you?
I don't
know if you want to go first. I can go first.
Happy to go first. So it depends. So I like writing code. So
I do too.
And I heard this analogy that the AI is like a 3D printer. That if you like to sculpt something, it's a therapeutic thing. You can sculpt your thing. So it depends what I'm coding. But if I'm pressed for time, I would definitely not hand code it. Right.
But can you give an example of something you have hand coded recently? Like, was it for work?
So. This is weird talking to my boss and saying, did you waste time
I'm
coding when you could? No, but what I like to do is I like to define the structure of the few classes and the scaffolding of what I want to build. And then I tell the agent, finish my code. I don't want to bother with the rest. So I know the architecture is how I like it. And it's...
But you find it better
5% of the entire code.
I don't mean to argue with you, but... Because I do the same, except I'm not actually writing up the classes. I'll say I want this, and I want this kind of a design for these kinds of classes, right? But I'm not actually but you're saying you want to create the files and write class foo,
and
because you enjoy it.
Sometimes it's faster so I would start. So we're building a command line rendering library, right? So I would start with the agent designing how we would do it, and I ask, what do you think of this approach? And then, of course, it says, oh, that's an excellent, you're brilliant. That's a legendary, the one I like the most was like, that's a legendary idea. Anyway, we go through, and then when I'm happy with it, sometimes I go and create the directories that I want. I create either a build file or a main class because I don't want it to pick a directory that I don't like. And I say, okay, in this directory, alongside this, create what we just discussed. So I give it pointers because I find it's faster. If I do that, then I think deciding where to put the code or what to do.
Well, but I will say, we didn't talk about this, but we also ship planning mode. And planning mode for me is that ideal thing, right? Of like, if it's a bigger thing, it'll propose what it's going to do, and I'll only tell it no if I disagree. And so something like a director location would be something that I might be like, let's not.
Yeah. Sometimes I find it faster just to create a directory and point it to it.
You're not alone. Yeah.
But
it seems like the developer is going to need to spend the time on the same thing. Like, you can either spend it up front saying this is the structure I want, or you can let that do it, and then you need to spend time understanding what it did and then iterating on that, right? So it may be in terms of like how your mind works or what you think is more performance oriented. Like, if it takes you less time to say no, these directories go, as opposed to like, what did it do? Now let's spend some time.
It's more that I will be specific, but in the prompt, not the doing. But
I think I'm more like you, Tor. I don't know if it's a %, but it's definitely very little. I think for me that changed maybe in the last 3 months. I think mostly using Studio as I was not as patient before. I think newer version of Gemini, especially 3.5, but also improvement, not just to V2, not to, toot my own horn, but like I think actually the improvement that the Code Awareness team did on all the search, because I was really really unhappy with some of the results before. But it's so much better now. And so I trust the agent a lot more. I still review everything that he does, but I mostly put stuff in the prompt. Sometimes I will be like, well, I want to rename this field that you just created. It's like, well, I'm just going to use refactoring.
Yeah, I mean, that is the 1%,
right?
But
exactly, right? It's very small things like that.
I feel like the parallelism is what makes it possible because you're doing many things. So if it did something wrong, you can have it go and correct it later. It's less damaging because I'm not going to sit and wait for that. I'm going to do something else while it's making the correction.
To me, the challenge that I have today is on where to type the prompt. I think I felt a bug on that like a month or so ago. Like, I don't really like our query box. It's tiny and it's like, but I'm not yet at a point where I want to type like full spec files and spend a lot of time writing a spec file. But I do want to type a couple of paragraphs and
we're working on something good for
stuff
that.
like that.
More to come. Yeah.
And it's like right now it's like it's just 3 lines or something, and that's really annoys me. So I create a lot of scratch files where I type a few paragraphs and I define this is the architecture that I want to do. I want an interface here and I want a couple of things there or whatever, and then I just pass that to it and then it does it.
I recently was designing something and I asked the agent, okay, we're going to do it this way, that way. And when I was done, I told the agent, okay, now I want you to write a prompt for me for how you would ask yourself to code this with all the details we just discussed, because I didn't want anything to be lost. And then it itself wrote the prompt that in a new fresh window I asked to do. And it was a much cleaner experience.
Yeah. I like asking it to write up everything it's tried and learned so far and ideas to try next. If it's a complicated task, that like getting that artifact is useful.
Yeah.
All right, Chet. Now it's you. Where are you in your...
This is sort of the pointless part of this conversation. Everything...
Your latest screenplay, how much of that was just, hallucinated by an AI?
All of the code, all the technical stuff I'm doing right now is by definition either throwaway or personal use anyway, which means I haven't actually written a line of my own code or website stuff because I don't care. All I care about is the end product, and it's not about code maintainability or ownership of this code going forward. Like I would be afraid to do this within the context of being back at Google, because humans need to understand this in chasing bugs or understanding it, maintaining it later. Whereas mine, I'm like, I iterate on what the thing looks and works like, and what exactly the code looks like is sort of pointless to me as long as it has the functionality that I need. So I'd say 0%.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not that I don't care about the code because I care a lot. I'm going to actually subject myself to human review of that code. Right? So like I'm responsible for every line. So it's more that like it does it and it's now really good at what it does. It writes high quality code. I still spot mistakes and it's very impressed when I do. But I most things that I submit have gone through multiple.
Is it really impressed? Does it say it's really impressed?
It just makes me it wants to butter me up so I don't look too carefully. But it represents many, many cycles. I think most things have gone through at least 5 AI reviews before I even then go and audit the diffs carefully, and that's when we pull out the change review tool.
And I think, Chet, you just said about if I was writing code that other humans need to review, and that is also shifting. Yeah. So the code that we produce is being analyzed by AI after the fact. So even finding bugs. But the one thing that doesn't change, we're still responsible for the code, regardless of how it looks. So if we produce a tool that deletes a developer's hard drive, it is our fault. So I am shifting to not so much how it does it, but what it does. Yeah. Understanding what it does. It requires understanding the code at a different level than before. So, things like coding styles or coding conventions to me are shifting into the background.
It's already nailed it. Like it writes very, very beautiful Kotlin code. Like that is not where the problems are. Exactly. It's usually in some assumption it's made that you're like, no. You can't do it like that.
Yeah, from security point of view or missing features or things that are going to explode or not work in older devices, or the context window that a human developer has is gigantic compared to an agent, so they will never be able to catch with it. Well, say never unless, AGI. But that is where the focus is shifting, not even reading the code anymore.
No, it's I find that it's very good at, like, for example, when I started working on V2, like, I had not used coroutine very much at all. And it's been very helpful to help me figure out what's going on and sometimes it finds some weird corner cases that I would not have known, and it's very good at dealing with that. but it's very bad at like just general architecture, API design, and all of that. So I'm kind of interested to, because you say you have it do a lot of review before you look at the diff. For me, I don't do that. I look at all of it because I want to catch like, API design issues and just general architecture issues. Then I have it do the reviews, and then I take another look after. Do you not look at the architecture aspect? Or maybe you do like more.
I'm talking
localized.
about maybe smaller things. If I was going to build something big, I go through planning mode. So I'm reviewing before the fact. But if I'm having it, I'm trying to think of a good example. Oh, that's so hard to pull out, But like if it's a smaller thing it's building and it's touching 3 or 4 files, I'm going to have it look at it first and see what it spots, where it goes like, you're missing some tests here. Oh, there's this, I have some prompt instructions for how to do code review, all the things. And the focus is find bugs. That's the most important thing, But there's many others, threading, all these things, right? And so I want it to have checked for all those things and test completeness before I spend my time actually looking at the diffs, because I'm going to have to look at it at the end anyway. Yeah. So it's like, okay, when you're proud of it, then I'll look. And then I'll typically spot things. And then we'll do a few more iterations, right? Yeah.
All right. Anything we forget to ask or talk about?
I'm sure there's many, like we announced a lot at I.O. I would recommend everyone go read our blog post. We also did a presentation. Like some of the things that are coming off the top of my head is we did Gemma 4 integration. So in the past, you had to install third-party software like Olama or LM Studio. We now ship with a custom runtime directly in Studio. So within the model provider, you can just click and download these models, no setup necessary.
Did you have a What's New in Tools session, or was it in the developer keynote, or what?
Yeah, we had one of those. So the video is available. I had bad luck with like for some reason, when I was trying to do this live, the models weren't responding, and they had been rock solid for me. Like, in the past 3 years, doing demos has been so nerve-wracking, because it used to be that when I walked out on stage at I.O. to do demo, I knew what the software was going to do. Like I feel pretty good. Most features I've demoed have been pretty solid, so I haven't been really nervous about it. AI, especially 2023, 2024, 2025, it would do random things, right? So you get a different response every time. So it's very hard to prepare a demo for this. But I think in the last 6 months, with 3.0 Flash, 3.1 Flash, it's really good now. So I don't think it's going to do something crazy. Of course, capacity is always a scary thing around I.O. because everyone's hammering us because of all the new exciting features, right? But right when I was doing the demo, neither model was responding. Both our backend and the API key backend. And so I was switching on the fly, and that was a little, and I got back to my desk and other people on the team were like, hey, is anyone having problems with 3 Flash? And I was like, oh, perfect timing.
And it just lasted just those days.
And that's the only time that's happened all spring, was that one time I was on stage. But,
did you ask the people in the audience to please stop using the AI?
I didn't. Yeah. No, it's, yeah.
And wasn't your account supposed to be like on a super priority list or whatever that did not do anything?
Yeah. A couple of more things that I'm remembering. We had a bunch of new features in our profilers, which is Esteban's responsibility. And one of them is the new Android Performance Analyzer. That's like a pure profiler, so maybe not relevant to this discussion. But we have some really interesting AI integrations in them. Do you want to talk about those?
Yes. So we launched the Android Performance Analyzer, and we are starting to. Another thing we launched is skills that we should probably talk about it too. But Performance Analyzer is mostly focused on system tracing now, but we are evolving into a tool for game developers as well, for frame profiling and so on and so forth. And of course, we're adding AI to it with the ability to talk to models directly from APA soon. And we have, for I.O., we launched skills to be able to process traces so that agents can look at your that's why I remember skills. Your agents can look at your traces and start looking at bottlenecks and problems and analyze the traces directly.
And they're really good at it.
Yes.
This is one of the things we saw, that we would build really powerful profilers, but most engineers, unless they work in this building, would be like, well, what is this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? And these skills are basically teaching the agents how to query for the right things. And we're using agents to track down not just Android performance problems, but also problems in our own code, in the agent. There's some really complicated things happening with Skia and GL and Compose and recompositions and just kind of letting agents do a first pass and come up with some theories that you then spend the time to investigate is very, very useful. And we also have the Leak Canary integration.
Yes. But I want to talk about skills as well, because right before I.O. we launched a set of Android-specific skills, from R8 to profiling to many things. And there's a specific Android repo in GitHub for all the official skills from Android. You can get them from either Studio or Android CLI or using NPX skills. This reminds me to the Matrix movie when Neo says, "I know Kung Fu." Yeah. This is what you do, to your agents. I know how to performance analyze an Android app. And they're super useful, and you can access them with Android skills.
When you want to quickly explain how an agent deals with a skill?
Yeah. I just want to mention that in Quell 2, they're going to be packaged with Studio directly, or a copy of them. We're going to work on more skill management features, but in Quell 2, you don't even have to do anything when you're using Studio Bot. They're just in there. So a skill is basically a markdown file with the instructions. And then at the beginning of the file, there's a slightly different format that just describes what the skill does, right? Just like basically one sentence or something like that. And so when you run the agent the first time, when you build a system prompt that has all, the normal instructions, we also go find all the skills in the right folders, or in the case of Studio now built in with it. And then we just tell the agent, hey, you have the skills, here's the description of all of them, and here's the path of it. And basically the agent, depending on what the user wants to do, it sees the list of skills, it decides to run this one, it has the path of it, and it just read that file, and then it just basically load, quote unquote, which is a fancy word for saying it just read the file, that's it, and it just have those instructions. But skills can also have, those instructions can also reference other things. So in the skill folder, you can have other reference documentation that you could load on demand depending on what. You can have scripts that it could be running. So there's actually a lot of things. But that skill file is the entry point that it will load and figure out what to do from there.
So the key point is that it's got a minimal amount of overhead unless it's needed.
Yeah.
Because, in the past, you could put like your agents.md or Gemini.md could like have all this information, but you would burn a lot of tokens. And so this is a special convention that sort of lets you teach it. There's still some limitations, right? If you put 30,000 skills into your path, it's still going to burn a lot of tokens. But
that's what I was mentioning, right? It's built into Studio, although there's a checkbox to disable them if you don't want them. So we package with a snapshot of that GitHub directory, repository that Esteban mentioned. But in the future, we're going to want to look at, more skill management, like installing new one, updating them, selecting them, and CLI will do that for you, or the install at least, not the selection. Selecting a skill is kind of weird because once you put it in that folder, it gets discovered. So disabling it might mean removing it from the folder. So there's things we need to figure out. But
and depend how you instruct your agent can discover new skills and learn it itself. So if you say, I want you to do this, make sure you check the skills. This is a command to check skills. If you need to learn something, learn it. And the agent will go and list all the available skills. Will say, okay, I need to study this, and this topic. It will read them all, and it will do the task.
And is that what's going to be automatically built into Quail 2? Or do you still need to say, here's the command to go find new things?
So in Quail 2, we took a snapshot. We're bundling it inside Studio. So when we build that prompt, we include those skills that are part of Studio distribution.
Okay.
So basically the AI will be better at Android in that version.
And it will be better out of the box. But, the people working on those skills can add new ones. And they won't be part of Quell 2 because Quell 2 will just take a snapshot. So we're going to have to look at.
But if you use Android CLI to install more, like our agent looks in that folder, right? So they would get picked up, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But if they're on the GitHub repo out in the cloud, it doesn't know about those, right? So it still needs a way to go discover new things that have been added.
If the agent calls Android CLI and says Android skills list, it will list the ones in the repo, and it will install the latest version.
Oh, okay. This is awesome because I've always wanted to know Kung Fu.
There's a greater skill in there.
So as we mentioned, there's also Leak Canary integration, where the agent can sort of use the new integrated Leak Canary to fix the code. And then finally, we previewed but have not released yet 2 features around code-based migration. So the first one is basically importing, 4 projects, and the one we demoed at I/O was for iOS to Android, but it's not limited to that. You can imagine React and other technologies that you can sort of have the AI integrate. And you could think that like an AI could do that already. You could point to another project. I've done this, right? And say, migrate this. But this is a bunch of extra machinery around that so that it preserves as much as possible the existing file structure. It has agent tools to do things accurately. So for example, in the case of iOS integration, it has a tool to natively understand storyboard files or to migrate like native iOS assets, because you don't want the AI to, basically create an icon based on what it sees, right? You want something that is actually pixel perfect. And the other migration tool is Views to Compose. This is something we're working quite heavily at because, unrelated to AI, we announced at I/O that that Compose is recommended. We're putting Views into maintenance mode. Everyone should switch. We know it's a big lift, so the AI is going to be a huge help with bringing your code over from Views to Compose. That's all I can remember. Is there anything else we should talk about? Last chance.
Or you could come back on the podcast at some later date.
Things are moving so fast. This is obviously where we put a lot of our resources. So I have no doubt that if we were to come back in a month or two, I mean, especially like I said, the change review tool, there's so many things that are happening right now. But all of it, right? CLI, we have big plans. Agent V2. When is Agent V3? When are we going to rewrite it again?
I hope never.
Yeah. I think we're on a very solid foundation now. Like that was one of the things that you put your foot down and said, okay, right? There will be no blending. There, we're going to have very clear separation of concerns, right? So there's less hacks that can happen the way they happened before.
And we're not going to keep vibe coding features without paying attention to the architecture, right? We need to be very careful. We need to maintain that code. And so,
last thoughts.
All right.
All good.
Until next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Are you new to podcasting?
Jesus. Yeah.
There is a cough button. If I press it,
I cough. Coughing.
It's these are those DJ sounds. Yeah, there's a laugh somewhere in here and ooga.